Okay, welcome. So we're trying to be a little more organized, more housekeeping organized. So we try to give notes and how do you call it exactly? Directions, GPS for where we're coming and where we're going to. Syllabus, not a syllabus really, but it's close to. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. And we're also trying to pay for ourselves. I don't know if there's an official sponsor today or not. There's a bunch of half-official sponsors. And if anyone wants to in the video, they could click a link and you'll find out what to do about that. Okay, so Tachlis Azoi. So I did a note, a little sheet that says basically, I think I have the same one that you have, or it's slightly different, but trying to show us where we came from. Where it says last week is not really interesting. It's just two things that we discussed last week, which were not really as pertinent as they should be to where we are. I'm going to give you a different version of that I thought of last week's class, which is more relevant to what we're going to do. And I wanted to give orientation for where we are now, and then we'll see what we have to do. So where we are is in what I wrote in the main header. That's the very important, and it's very precise that my headers, you have to basically understand the headers, you need to understand the whole class. But the header is general definition of soul, and you'll notice that it doesn't say the soul or a soul. A soul might be a good word, but it's soul, just as itself. And you should really think of like the Latin term anima, which just means living or living thing, or the Greek term, what was the Greek term? Greek term is psyche, but not actually going to help too much. We get terms like psychology and so on from that, but that's not going to teach us. But people say we should translate the word on life force or the livingness or aliveness, something like that. In Rishonim it gets translated as something like chiyuni, like livingness, not like chayim is the same thing, but you want to get like the adjective of it, like the action of living. And general definition is also an important thing that I'll get to. So that's my header, and the way to do it is what it says primary sources, or in here we did it differently. Like today we'll learn this, which is the actual the first chapter in the second book of Aristotle's book, The Anima, or in Greek, on soul, in English on the soul, which is a mistranslation. There's no the in Greek. In Hebrew, ala nefesh. This is an ancient Old Hebrew translation, or Sefer HaNefesh also might be more precise. And in that chapter, he's really this is his header also. Like so, my header in the header of the class is Aristotle's header for the first chapter. The second chapter says something like the cause of the soul, and the third one is this specific definition. So this is very precise for him. He's trying to get the general definition of what soul is. And so what I would like to do, and this is my general thing of being able to do, is if you would look at this text, which is this, we need to be able to sort of work through it. At least that's a goal. That's a promise. It's not so easy. But we need to be able to sort of read it and have it sort of make sense. Both the text and the thoughts in it, or more importantly, the thoughts in it. But the text also. So that's what we need to do. It's probably not really a job for like an hour. It's a job for like a year or so. But we try. I also did a little list, a different like summary, or we'll see if we could work with it, of this same chapter, which is this. Might somewhat clarify the text, or not really, or it's literally copies from the text mostly, but also might clarify what we're trying to get at. Okay, so I'm gonna more work from this than from the text in my class now, and then this is why we did the questions on the back side of this page, or whichever page you have. This. So, okay. It's this. And you have this, right? The questions, my test, and those are the base. Those this and this are the same thing. Like it corresponds. the questions, the place where I put the lines to answer, and this list of definitions are the same thing. So in other words, this is just a list, which is you wouldn't understand if you don't understand here, which is slightly more asking the questions in the way I think we need to ask them. Okay, I hope that was clear enough for Hakdama. No, if it's not, then too bad. We'll have to just do it. So where we are is like this. And I'm going to give one more, Adkan, technical details. This was just technical details. Now, what I would say, and this is really my real connection with what I did last week, just so you understand that I'm not crazy by doing that whole digression, detour. Because what I really want to do, and the reason why we get into this whole thing is mainly because we come from a certain tradition. We didn't come from nowhere, like you say. And this tradition at least includes, and actually a lot more than that, more or less the Aristotelian definition of the soul, which is like, you could write it like someone else told me I have to write, like the Rambam's Mahalach. Chaz v'sholom, Rambam was gelernt from Aristotle, but Chaz v'sholom not Aristotle, but it's the same thing. I mean, there's slight differences, but and we come from that. And the problem with that is, like we discussed in the beginning of last class in different terms, that the Rambam explicitly didn't give us the why of these things. So even if you learn Rambam, even if you learn Zohar or Chassidish Sforim and so on, for the most part, they are based on a kind of dogmatic summary of Aristotelian ideas. And the Rambam understands, just like the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, and this is very clear, just like the Rambam's Mishnah Torah is like, I'm not going to give you the whole why, what he calls Shlish B'Talmud. He understands that it's important. Even for Halacha, he doesn't entirely think it's not important. But that's not his job. He's going to give you the what, the maskuna, right? You should do Shabbos, there's 39 meluchas and so on. He's not really explaining why these are the meluchas or why, and for that he either thinks it's not important or thinks it's not his job. But he does the same exact thing for philosophy or for theology and so on. And definitely in Mishnah Torah, and to some extent even in Moreh Nevuchim. He doesn't give you the why. In other words, when you learn, if you learn Rambam, you would hear that there's a soul, and some meaning of the soul, and there's three kinds of souls. You know, the plant soul or nutritive soul, and the emotional or moving soul, and the intellectual soul, and things like that. And you will hear all kinds of things that the smart Oibach Rambam will tell you. You know, it's only the intellectual soul that goes to Gan Eden, and only the actualization of that, and so on. All of these kinds of things, but you will only hear it in dogmatic sense. And dogmatic, I mean, in the sense of like animam and shekach v'kach, and that's why we get into this whole discussion. Like the Rambam said, animam is real animam is slightly different, but that's all in the level of animam, which is not really the interesting level. And he does it because he understands that this is a teaching method for him to give you the maskunas without deduct the reasons, and he doesn't see his job, not in halacha and not in philosophy, to give you the reasons why these things are so. Even in Moreh Nevuchim, in places where he gets into like proofs and things, he's mostly not really interested in proving. He's interested in in the thing that comes after that. He just needs to do that sometimes to clarify things. That's
those who believe that the intellect part of the soul is what goes up. What does that mean? What does that mean, intellect?
Well, we'll get to that. But what I'm saying is that a very general comment that when you hear that, that's not really interesting, and it's mostly not interesting because we're still just talking on the level of authority or of dogma, of like what someone said or what someone believed, and it becomes a whole discussion. The Heilige Rambam believed this or the Heilige Rambam didn't believe that, which is not really relevant for any smart people. And then they start asking, but the Rambam was smimas dekoso, but his job was to give you the maskonas and not to give you the whys. And it also distorts, but this is one like historical thing, but it also distorts the understanding of it. When you don't get the why at all, you don't really understand what the point of any of this is. It becomes another like fact to memorize, which is not very interesting. So therefore what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to skip right to the thing, because otherwise I'm going to talk about this for 2 hours. But what I'm going to do is try to cut right away to the trying to understand the whys and the kinds of thoughts or the motivations, in the sense of thoughts, not motivations in the emotional sense, but the motivations for all these kinds of thoughts, for this whole structure, for this whole conceptual universe that the Rambam and everyone else is working within. And that is a hard thing to do, as we discussed last time, because they don't start from the same place as we start, but we have to do it anyways. And that's why we sort of read a text and try to wrap our mind around thinking the thoughts that they're thinking. So I'm not interested in interpreting Aristotle or something like that, but interested in trying to see if we could think the thoughts that he thinks. Okay? Schön, Atkan, Disagdam. Those are cues for you to know that you should put a dat or something.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the question. Now let's go to the question. I'm going to work off this page and off these 2 pages, so you could see where I am. Maybe we'll get into the inside of the book also. I don't know. So the question is like this. So let me frame it in the way that I've been framing it right now. We hear. What is this? You've probably heard of these things, like, for example, like the only the intellect goes to heaven, or like there's 3 kinds of souls. You must have heard of that. Or there's 3 parts of the soul, whatever exactly that means, and so on. The baya with all of that is that nobody knows what that means, right? Besides for not knowing details, like, okay, is there, like, I'll ask you a basic question which will show you this. For example, if you read Shmona Prokim, which is one of my things that you should read, in the first parak, he gives you like these 5 parts of the soul, the 5 powers of the soul, he calls them. What are the 5 powers? Something like the nutritive soul, the wanting soul, the thinking soul, the feeling soul, all kind of things like that. And even that, he could further subdivide into a bunch of things. He could say like the nutritive soul includes taking in food and pushing out the excrement and reproduction and all that goes with that and so on. And the growing soul includes more things and so on. And nobody really knows, and this is a real question. Many people I see like saying all these things and they don't really know what. For example, I'll give you a question. Why are some things parts? Like we have discussion if they're parts or not, but why do we talk about 3 kinds of soul? Like everyone that works on the system says there's a nefesh tzemachas, nefesh bahamis, nefesh sichlis. Why do we talk about 3 kinds of souls when if you even ask the same person to give you the details, it gives you like 7 different things? Or sometimes the Gru like quotes a list or Aristotelian list of like 70 powers of the soul. And the Gru famously said that was the only true thing in philosophy. Well, the problem is that if this is the only true thing in philosophy, then this is like most of philosophy about psychology. But anyways, these are lists, right? And they're divided into groups and so on. So why aren't there 70 souls? Or that's a very long list. But there's like 7. There's various different lists, various different ways of organizing it and so on. Even the Rambam himself, like in Shmona Prokim, he gives you a 5-part story. So someone needs to have a definition of what it is to be the same soul or the same thing with different power, does different things, or something different. What does it even mean? Like what is this? This is the mechalik, like they say in yeshiva. Right?
Understanding the question.
You understand the question?
No. These are different power. If there's different powers to the soul, what do you think one is negating the other and saying it's not true? And so
they're not negating each other, but there's if someone tells you there's 3 souls, there are 3 kinds of souls, and 7 powers, one of them has 3, one other one has 4, and so on, then if you would, for example, if just a thing that it does is another soul, then there should be 7 souls. If it's not, then why not? Why are we cutting it up this way and not another way? All right? If there's a nutritive soul that does...
Question, not a factual question.
I'm not sure what you mean by a factual question. It's a question of what in the world you're talking about. I don't know what you mean.
The soul.
What it is.
So if I give you different types of definitions that all refer to this soul, that's a problem?
Again, if someone tells you, I'm not saying that's a problem, I'm just saying that most people that repeat stuff don't know what they're talking about because they never ask the basic questions or the why questions of all this. There's an answer. That's what I'm not saying that there's a kasha. I'm just saying that this is it's the question that you need to ask. And when he tells you when people tell you this, they actually are meaning something. They just don't tell you what they mean, or at least they don't tell you in a clear enough way for people that didn't get through the background to understand. So therefore, you end up having all kinds of weird discussions where nobody knows what you're talking about. But that's not really my problem. I'm just saying that we need to understand. This is an example of something where you need to understand the why or the what makes it so in order to even understand what you're talking about. Because otherwise, either you say there's one soul which does a bunch of things, or you say that each thing is a soul. Then you say, okay, there's the question of definition. No, it's not a question of definition. It's a question of understanding what you're talking about. It's not. You could call it words, and then I'm not going to get into that discussion. But that's what I mean. Or in the same way,
if someone's insisting that there are 7 powers to the soul, it means that whoever said that there are 5 powers to to the soul misunderstood
is somehow wrong.
or
Yeah.
grouped within what he understood as soul, something that should or
Yeah, and
shouldn't be
the Rambam is very busy that don't say that there are different souls, they're only powers of one soul. These things don't seem to mean anything if you don't know what it's coming from.
Okay.
They become just a question of semantics, which nobody is ever interested in. Anything that you could solve by changing the name is useless to talk about in the philosophy class, in old philosophy class. The new philosophy classes, they're very interested in just fixing things by changing their names. But all the old philosophers assume that they're actually talking about things and trying to understand the things. So changing the name is not going to help you. Kurdish might be a soul, it doesn't make a difference. You have to understand how it works, like what it is. But I'm not going to go there. Point is, that's example. Or another example, what was the other example? Same way we talked about a question, I think we talked about this, which is like the whole machloikis. Like the Ramban literally makes it a machloikis. I think I discussed this here or in a different class, between the Chachmi Yevan and Chachmi Yisrael, if animals have souls, or in some way the same kind of soul as human souls. Aristotle was on the side that they do have souls, right? And it says, well, it says in the Pusik like this, is the whole thing. And as long as we don't know what this is about, then nobody knows what the point of this is. Like it's a weird question. The question isn't if they go to heaven, just to be very clear. That's not the same question. So.
And that related, when we say animals have souls, it's not the same.
Yeah, it's related,
level,
but.
Right, so it doesn't have an element that can.
All these things, words like levels and stuff, they have to mean something. We can't just use things like this.
Oh, then we call it a nefesh?
Yeah.
Because it's a like a person has a neshama and the animal has a nefesh.
Yeah, but these are just words. Like, what was the point of that? Okay.
A neshama has substance.
Okay.
Substance, qua
Wait.
form of natural.
Wait, that's a nefesh actually. I don't know what you mean, but see, again, you could call them different. After we have an understanding, we could stick on stickers and have good words for each one, distinct to know, and then we could check if it actually matches with the siddur or the chimish, these different words or not. But that's another, like that's like maybe not semantic, it's an interpretive question, but it's not really the philosophical question that we're interested in. So yes, so that's why, and this is very very good. So that's why. Okay, so this is a framing of why it's an important question. In other words, this is really what I mean when I say in my first question, you need to tell me the difference between a general definition or universal definition and a particular definition. Because, and this is what Aristotle's first thing that he's trying to get at is, he tries to say, we need to decide or we need to talk about what is, like I wrote it here, what is a soul and what is the human soul, or you could say the animal soul, or the chicken soul, or the grass soul, or the tree soul, and so on. So in other words, if we call all these things soul, and what we mean by that, by the way, and we'll get to that. I already said this, right? I don't have to repeat this, but this is another prerequisite that you have to remember, that for this way of thinking, there can't be a question if there is a soul. Okay, that's a question that doesn't make sense. The question is only what a soul is. The question is not if there is a soul. Let's be very clear. Okay? Because soul, again, like I said earlier, when you hear the word soul, put in the word life. And we could say the word life. And it's very hard. I mean, you could deny, but we're not denying here that there's some things that are living and some things that are not. If you want to deny that, you could. But that would be a more different discussion. So it's not a question like usually when we go in this, we talk about like, is there a soul? And some guy, says there's no soul. There's nobody that says there's no soul in this world. Because that would be like saying there's no living things. Not that would be like saying, that would be the same thing. The question is what it is to be alive, or what causes things to be alive, and so on. But the question is not if there is a soul. The question is what it is. Okay, this is very clear, because if you don't have this akdama, then nothing makes sense.
To deny the reality of living things.
That there are living things that are distinct from dead things, yes. You could deny that, by the way. It's not like crazy, but that's the framework here. So therefore, we need to sort of have a word or a definition for what a soul is before we talk about. Now, which is before and which is after is always a serious question for Aristotle, because it's not clear that it's not easy enough to like give a general definition before you have a particular definition. In other words, we always going to, and that's what he does in chapter 2, goes backwards. He starts from a particular soul and goes up to a general soul. Because there's not really such a thing as a general soul. In other words, he's not a Platonist, right? We're not trying to get like the soul that in which humans and animals and trees and so on share, like some big soul somewhere. But we do need a definition that includes all of these. So we should, because all of these include life, right? They all are living in some sense the same way. So we need the general definition of soul, and then to drill down that definition itself, it's not like there is a big box called soul, and in this box there's a bunch of little things called specific souls. They're the same thing. This is just what these things have in common, or the universal definition of them. There's not a real universal in this way of speaking. In other words, but this is another way of saying that we need to understand, and for my words, I'll make it much easier. It's not another way of saying that if you start having discussions like, what is a human soul, what is a tree soul, is there such a thing as a tree soul, and so on, we need to first know what we mean by the word soul, precisely. And that's just before we start talking about it. Then we could go backwards and start saying, well, we see that these things live, and that's actually what it is to be a soul. But a more general definition, so it's somewhat less useful, the general definition, but it's useful to know what we're talking about. Does this make sense?
As a prerequisite to the specific souls that things might
As a
have.
prerequisite, yeah. Not a prerequisite, not necessarily prerequisite in like the reality, but in at least for discussing it, yeah. Although then that general soul is going to have to be filled in by the particular soul. In other words, you're going to have to ask again what it really is, and you're going to have to go down to the particular in the end.
So Aristotle's looking for a local I don't know, explanation for, but a local expression of life force, differently from, let's say, Plato, who is assuming that if there are things that have a life force, they are participating in one.
Yeah, he's not.
kind of
That's
soul.
for sure true. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It doesn't. He assumes that that's nonsense. Doesn't help much. But more relevant to us is just that we need to know what we mean when we say that something has a soul, in the most general sense. Or what kind of being a soul would be. What that's really what he gets to talk about. What category of being is it? And then that category of being in a human is one thing, and an animal is another thing, and it's a different kind of that. That's basically what we need to know. Okay? So in other words, you need to be able to answer me what a soul is before you answer me what a human soul is. Everyone I think agrees with that. Right? Just like you need to answer me what a Melecha of Shabbos is before you answer me what Melecha's Borer is, okay? In the same exact way. Although it's very hard to do that. So most of the time you really have to learn Al-Chazech Shabbos, because the Melecha of Shabbos isn't really a lot more than all the Lamatas Melechas. But it's still useful to work this way. Or maybe it's true to work this way, but that's... Okay? So that's the first question, okay? So now, in other words, what we do with this, and this is I'm going to make it as clear as I could, if it's not clear enough.
The questions, right, on the sheet?
This is question number 1, yeah. This is question number 1 on the sheet, and now we're done with that. Okay, a general definition is what answers you what a soul is, not what the specific kind of soul is. But really, to be more precise, it's going to be now I'm getting to the connection. Well, I'm going into this page more. But really, to be more precise, what we would do is something like this. We would say something. This is the most general way of speaking, and it's very difficult to do it, but it's also very clear if I do it this way.
Is this a new point?
Yeah. So now 2. Okay, it's not really the second question. It's the second thing on. I don't know what it is. Okay, it's the continuation of this book. Now, what we would have, in other words, what we need to do, and this is again not speaking of semantics. What we need to do is we need to look at the universe, the everything, right? We started 2 weeks ago with that. The everything. Okay, now the everything, and this is the book, Aristotle's book, The Categories, which tries to talk about this question, at least according to some people. Everything is not a thing in the same way. This is a very important point. I think we did this somewhat in one of the prerequisite classes about substance and so on. But I need to get to it over here, so we can drill down. In other words, let's say it like this: there's the universe, the everything. The universe, at least when we understand it, gets divided and subdivided in all kinds of smaller ways. Like Plato said, that understanding anything is division. We start with everything and we drill down. So this is different from this is different from that. Aristotle thinks that that's not really a good way to learn, but at least he's working with that method right here, over here, called the method of division. Chalukah, if you read Hebrew in medieval Hebrew, Chalukah, division. Chiluk, in later Pilpul language. But anyways, the method of division. And this is basically, you want to know what a thing is, so we start from the top. So everything is everything. Now, how do we divide up everything, okay? This is really the question. And there's many thousands of ways, right? But there's one correct way, according to Aristotle. Or according to anyone that really has a coherent ontology or metaphysics, there's one correct way. Now, the one correct way, so Aristotle starts with his most general rule, which is known as the 10 categories. or really we just need to know about two categories, okay? There are things and there are things about things. We discussed this at length. What we really need to do right now is to put the soul into one of these categories. So we're not going to, this is one of the other reasons why we have this note, because you should know this already. There are things and there are things about things, which is, there's many ways of saying this, by the way. But the important thing is that things about things don't really exist, or can't explain themselves, okay? In other words, let's do, I'm going to use the example that he talks about right here. That's where I'm getting to question 2 about natural bodies. For example, the circleness of a, well, I'm not going to say that example, okay? So for example, there are things that are made out of other things, okay? Most things in the world are made out of other things. Well, most things are made out of other things. Not true. Okay, anything unnatural is made out of something else. Okay, so if you ask what a thing, I'm going to get to this. This is the answer to the question number 2. Okay, there are things in general that there are things about other things. I'm not going to talk about that right now at length because I already did it once. And if you forgot, then go to that class. But I'm going to talk about natural bodies versus unnatural bodies. Okay,
things about those things are the substance.
Unnatural bodies are things about other things. That's the important definition.
One more time.
There are natural things and unnatural things. Okay, so let's start something like this. Okay, there are things in the world, and there are things that are made out of things. Okay. Now these are two categories of things. He thinks this is not a way that we are used to entirely thinking, but it's a very normal way to think. Okay. So for example, and we'll do something like this. If you ask me, okay, give me an example. Anything?
Volunteer.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Okay. If you ask me what a
book is, tree.
Not a tree. Okay. If you ask me what a camera is, I'm going to tell you that it has a form, which is that it takes pictures and so on. But let's talk about what it is. It's a body, right? A thing. Body is just a word for a thing.
It's discussing the natural versus unnatural.
Yes. But if I ask you let's talk about the body, not about the form, because we'll see about this in a second. But if I'm trying to get at the thing versus the thing about a thing, and you tell me that it's made out of plastic and metal and so on, right? Another way of saying this in modern terms would be that there's no sort of natural law, there's no law of nature that tells us anything about cameras. A camera is a composite thing. It's made out of other things. Okay? It's made out of other things in the sense that, at least in the most basic sense, that it's just made out of a bunch of things. Okay? And let's say something like this, there is no
natural principle.
Well, I don't say words that would define themselves by themselves. There's nothing making it a camera. The things that make it up, let's say like this. The things that make up the camera don't make it into a camera. Okay, that's very important. So if you want to explain me what a camera is, well, you could tell me what it does. Okay.
The sum of its parts is greater than that.
I don't know what that means. If you want to give me a definition of what a camera is, okay, you could define it by what it does, okay, which is known as the form of the thing. This is a very important part of everything. What it does, it takes pictures and so on, and maybe it's in a shape and organized in the way that it could take pictures and so on. That's one important thing, okay? But a form is not a thing, right? Very important for Aristotle. At least forms don't exist by themselves. You're never going to see cameras just walking around by themselves. You might have it in your mind. That's another discussion that we have to get to. But you're never going to see it in the world. Okay, there are no cameras. There are no forms of cameras that exist by themselves. Okay, so a form is the thing about another thing, by the way, according to him. So, so cameras are not explained by their form. They're not their form. They need their form to be explained. That's part of the definition. A camera is something that takes pictures, but it's not. If you want to explain it, you want to say what makes it that. The obvious answer, by the way, this answer should be obvious. What makes a camera? Or maybe I should say, who made a camera?
We did.
What?
We did.
Well, Nikon made it. Canon. Okay? Whoever the guy in Japan that makes cameras, he made it into a camera. Okay? He made it according to some plan and so on that has a function. But the function, you can't find functions. Functions only live in things. So
this I don't fully grasp.
Okay, so a camera cannot be explained by its parts. It's not greater than some of its parts. I don't know what that would mean. But it can't be explained by its parts. You need its parts plus a guy that pulls parts together into a camera system or form. Okay? Which is another way of saying that it's not really a thing. because it's basically a bunch of little things working together because of some guy that pushed them together.
Its functions is exhausted by its description.
I don't know what these words mean, okay? No, I don't know what that means. They're not.
No, meaning once you explain it, there's nothing
The
left
thing,
about it, right?
There is nothing. There is more than the part.
I don't know more.
Whenever you
There's
say
nothing more.
about it,
There's nothing more. What I'm trying to get at now is not if it's more or less. That again, you have to already accept that there's matter. And I'm not talking about this. That everything has. This is what it says here. But you already know this. Okay, you already know that everything in the world can be analyzed in terms of form matter, and the form and matter composite. Okay, which is what it is. Okay, that's we're not discussing right now. Okay, you have to already agree with that or agree with that. We have to work with this concept. I can't
I'm saying,
explain
does that mean
like,
that it doesn't need an additional
what
higher
I'm trying to
function?
talk about is that what I'm trying to talk about is the difference between a natural thing and an unnatural thing. Okay, a natural thing is more of a thing than a not natural thing, for the basic reason that all unnatural things can be broken down to natural things. Now let's say something like this. Okay, an unnatural thing, an artificial thing, otherwise known as an artificial thing, like a camera or a table, is made out of other things, right? Tables are made out of trees, okay? And cameras are made out of plastic and glass and whatever. Okay? Now, which means another way of saying it would be that the things that make it up don't constitute what it is. Okay? The glass in the camera and so on is not making it into the form of the camera. It could make it as a matter that could, but you need a person.
So
You need some
does or doesn't
third
rely
thing.
on its parts to be what it is.
No, it doesn't. It's not enough. Its parts don't define what it is.
Potentially,
The things that it's made out of do not define what it is.
So if you take apart a microwave and you put it
Not in
a
the same way. Not in the same way. Not in the same way.
Not
Not in the
natural.
same way that the parts of nothing define what it is.
It doesn't
The
lose
part.
anything.
It doesn't. Another way of what?
Does it meaning it doesn't lose something if a part is omitted?
No.
Besides for whatever function?
Why would I say that? No.
Okay,
No.
so then I don't
No.
understand.
No. It doesn't lose anything. I mean, it loses depending on how many screws it needs.
Basically, if you take the parts
Let's.
away, you can make it into something completely different.
You could do that with everything, but the point is that you could do that with a tree too. Let's try to understand. Trees are not made out of other things. They're obviously made out of other things, okay? But you don't need anyone to make it into a tree, okay? Which means that whatever the tree is, it has some kind of. It's more of everything else. In the end of the
Doesn't
day.
need to be made into
Let me say
something
this in
to
the
be
most
what it
simple
is.
way, without all these complicated things, okay? All the things that people make, they make out of natural things, okay? So whatever existed by Shaish and Abirajtis, or whenever that are the natural things, okay? And everything that comes after are unnatural things, okay? That's the story, the fact. Everyone agrees with this, right? Well, now the shal is if this is a real distinction, that's where you have to get to, right? Everyone agrees with this, okay? Let's not find this. All unnatural things are fake, okay? And at least in the sense of not being a thing, exactly, because they're made out of things that were first things, okay? That's what natural just means. Just giving you a definition of natural. Now, what does this actually mean? Because I'll try to explain the question, the problem with saying this. The problem with saying this is that you could actually analyze natural things into their parts also, right? We could say that trees are made out of, let's say even the more high level part, leaves and trunks and roots, okay? So trees are, and that makes it into a tree, okay? So what is exactly the difference when I say yes, and tables are then made out of trees? There doesn't seem to be a real difference here. And this is really what, if you would think that there's no real difference, then you would think that there's no such thing as a soul, or no such thing as life, or no such thing as natural life. We'll get to the difference between life and not life in a minute, but at least natural things, okay? So for example, it's natural for rocks and so on. Rocks keep on falling down without them changing, without anyone doing anything to them. If you do something to them, it might not fall down, okay? And that's an unnatural thing. What? Yeah, rocks fall down all the time. I don't know if you're what? They fall down. Always. They just keeping on falling until something stops them. That's what they do all day and all night. All the rocks that I've ever known, that's all they did. Okay? And they did that without anything being added to what they are. They just did that. That's what they do. Okay? When I take a rock and I make it into an arch so it doesn't fall down, Okay, then I used some of the natural things of rocks. I sort of used gravity or whatever it is to make the arch stand, but I didn't find that arch, so it needed me to do it, right? It needed me to do it.
Naturally fall down.
Yeah.
Doesn't need it.
Yeah, of course.
Without any other help whatsoever.
Yeah. Did you ever see rocks flying up?
That's because of gravity.
So
I don't know what gravity
the
is.
difference between a natural
They
and
naturally do things.
So the difference between the natural and the unnatural thing is whether or not.
What does it mean, grav? Grav is just another word for what I'm saying. It doesn't change anything.
So, but a rock being what it is
And
doesn't
now.
require any intervention. That's what we're saying, right?
Explaining what a rock is, you don't
If I take
need.
a rock to space, and it won't.
Don't need to resort to
If you
explaining
what?
a
If I
natural
take
thing.
the rock to space, it won't do that.
If you take
A rock to space, it will not do that.
I don't know what you're talking about. Of course it will fall down. Of course it will fall down. What do you mean?
Okay,
What do you mean it won't fall down?
fine.
Why that? Of course it will fall down. Relative to whatever falling down means over there, but what's the problem with that? What's the baya? It's still falling down all the time.
Are you saying that
Machstaza.
unnatural things always have?
So in order for me to describe an unnatural thing, I need to describe it by its natural parts. Is that what I'm saying? Is that this
Then you
theory?
don't need anything else to describe it, and which not really a question of
You
describing,
describe
which means
tree, I
that
say
it
it's a tree.
isn't anything else.
You need to describe
Okay.
a tree. I say it's a tree.
There
To say
isn't
describe a
anything.
camera, I
There
have to say
isn't
more
anything
about-
else in it. That means that there isn't anything else in it besides
It's
for what
tree.
it is. In other words, to explain, let's say something like this. In order to explain what it is, in order to say what it is, in other words, what it is, just using the word explain to show you that, you don't need to talk about anything besides for that.
So if I want
Okay,
to
which
describe
is
a
another
tree,
way
I
of
say
saying-
this is a tree.
Exactly.
Here's the tree.
Exactly.
If I say here's a camera, that doesn't work. because
No, well,
it's a camera.
it worked because camera, the definition, the words, that's why it's not a semantic question. Camera means something that someone took and made into a camera. That's what it means, the meaning of the word camera is. And that's what the meaning of a camera is, not only of the word camera is. And that's why the meaning of the word tree is not someone took these things and made it into a tree.
So unnatural things will always have like an extra, something external to it.
Their
that help
being,
explain
their
what it
being
is.
had their definition of their being has something besides for what they are, that they were made of. In other words, we need two parts. We need it was made out of by someone.
Natural versus not natural.
Because
Natural versus not natural. Anything that's not natural.
I don't know what.
That comes from natural stuff.
I told you because
Not
that's not
natural.
true. Because that's not simply true. Because also natural things are composite.
Right, so that's why you're not actually explaining why.
So that's why.
Your explanation isn't actually explaining the difference between natural and not natural.
Nah,
You're
of course it
trying.
is. Of course it is. It's what we
But
mean
you're
when we
just
say.
saying it's not
It's what we
natural.
mean when we say natural. Not what I don't know what
What?
someone else means. But we mean when we say natural.
means found in nature.
No, that's not what it means. I don't know according to you, but not according to Aristotle. The word
You didn't say anything.
again. You're
different.
being mechil- Of course, I said something different.
What did you say that's different?
Because I answered your question of why we can't just analyze a tree into its things, because that's not true. To be a tree doesn't need anything to make it into it. Doesn't need two things. A tree is not made out of other things actually. A tree is just a thing. Not because it was not because no, that's not why. That's again that's not why. But that's not why. Again, you have to try to listen to what some other people thought, not what we think. I know that some other people think differently. But to him, and that's where we have to start over here. It's not unless without this nothing is going to work. A tree doesn't get explained by someone taking a bunch of parts and putting them together in some way. A tree gets explained by being a tree, or in other words, by the soul of the tree. That's how we're going to get to this.
Not because it's nature.
I don't know what nature means. I have to
Because it's
explain this
found
word.
in what?
Found in nature is just a word. If I found it and it was made by a god,
Right, because it's only by the rules of nature that created it. and
I don't know what
nothing
rules of
more
nature. Who
than
made
that.
those rules?
What?
What does that mean by rules of the nature? Why are the rules of nature? You have to explain why these rules, what you're calling rules of nature, have some status more than the rules that I made up. Who's this nature that made so special? What's the difference?
Here's who made it. That is the definition. Because otherwise,
That's not the definition.
why is the tree? Then why is the leaf different than the trunk? Why are you making the axiom that you're considering a tree?
Nahamol, because we'll get to that. Why we think this for obvious reasons? Because trees obviously do something. Are trees? They tree, and they obviously do that by not by separately the trunk doing something and the leaves doing something. They do something
The
together.
leaves do something very different than the trunk.
No. We'll get to this. But that's not.
But my
But that's
understanding
not
of
the
the
point.
camera is that it's made
But that's
of
not the point.
things.
Makes one branch
I
sharp.
understand
Okay,
the camera.
I can't. I have what?
When I'm trying to understand the camera, I say a camera is made of things.
Listen, Listen,
All the light
Yeah, is that correct?
What?
To understand the camera, I say this is made of things. When I understand the tree, I don't understand that it's made of things. I just understand that it's a
So
tree.
you're saying it should be natural.
Not even I understand, but a
Listen.
tree is.
I don't know,
A camera is made out of
It's
things.
not very meaningful,
Yeah?
and
Is
because
that
of the lightning, like what is this? This is a tree that was sharpened by lightning.
Again, in order, I can't just repeat the same thing and argue about it, so it's not really useful.
I'm just curious
But-
if I understand it. A camera is made of things.
Exactly, it's made out of
The tree's
natural,
not
made out of natural
Made
things.
out of
So
natural
have,
things.
in other words, if you want, let me say like this: if you want to explain now, and there's a real difference according to this way of thinking. There's a real difference between that and between what the way a tree is made out of stuff and the way a camera is made out of stuff. Okay, because in order to explain how a camera works, you're gonna end up, you have to drill down to these to something else that actually works. In other words, you have to say, well, if someone took this piece of glass and put it together with another piece of glass and whatever, and now why does it work? Because glass has a nature of reflecting light and so on, and therefore, when a guy put together two pieces of glass and he put this thing behind it, it gets a picture. Okay, so you always drill down to a natural thing. When you do that to a tree, you don't have to do that. Not only you don't have to do that, you don't do that. Because a tree has something in it, and you could drill it down. It's made out of something. Everyone knows that it's made out of things, and everyone that trees die and decompose and so on. These are not chedishim that were invented last week. But the point is that the tree, besides for all that, does something from being a tree. There's something that can't be explained by reference only by treeness. And that treeness is the organization of a tree. Now, it's true that a camera also does something that's not, let's be very clear, a camera also does something that's not explained by anything other than camera-ness. Because it's not enough, you can't reduce a camera to pieces of glass. But that was put together by someone, by some external person,
And he used
by
the
some external
natural
thing.
functions to
Exactly,
direct it.
and not to direct it, to make it, to be the components of it. He's the one that directs it.
So basically,
But a tree directs itself, basically.
simply
Okay?
put,
Trees are things that direct themselves.
anything that's made without human intervention.
No, that's not the point. Humans are, see, this is not interesting, again, because humans are not humans or gods or anything. They're not interesting. They don't tell us about the thing. They tell us about how it happened and so on. We want to know about things. We want to know which things, why we think, which things are real things.
Well,
Okay?
no,
We don't want to know who made it. I don't care
Well, no,
who made
means
it.
who made it. Meaning, nothing has to be done for a tree to grow. Nothing has to be done.
Of
for
course, that's
art.
not true, but that's not true. Again, things
I
do
know
have to
we're
be
going
done,
into-
of course.
Of course. There's
So that's not the
processes and all
point.
that.
Exactly. And there's also, and also people are natural things. Like, there's no reason to think that people are the bad thing here. People somehow make things unnatural. That's not, and also not true. I'm pretty sure that when that stuff that animals make or anything else can be unnatural too. That's not the point. Exactly.
If lightning made the camera, nothing would change.
Exactly. Because there might be the simon why we think that, but the basic concept of it has nothing to do with who made it. It has to do with if the things that make it up, if it's a thing by itself, if it's a thing that does what it does by being what it is, or it's a thing that does by the parts of it doing each their own thing,
And that's what doesn't
and
matter if
then
it's a
someone
leaf
else
or
put it
trunk or
together.
whatever.
Okay, Adka. That's
Because they all do themselves
what?
of the tree, yeah.
No, leaves that they have their function, but they also their function also does only make sense within the story of the whole tree.
That's right.
That's not true for a camera. That's another way of saying it. And I sort of skipped to the end here, but that's the basic thing. A leaf of a tree or a mouth of a person isn't a thing that you can cut out of the person. A person wasn't created, sort of, so to speak, isn't made out of mouth that eats, and then stomach that digests, and then foot that walks, that some guy then assembled into a person. That's not a person would be. A robot is that, but a person is not that. A person's mouth makes no sense by itself. It doesn't do anything. A mouth is a thing that lets a person eat or talk or whatever it does with his mouth. And the same way, and a stomach is something that lets a person. So it's a system or a form, right? A system that stands for itself. It's a substance. Back to where step one. It's a substance. It's not something that's explained, made out of other things. It's a thing. It's an independent thing. We get start things from there. Everything else is made out of that. That's basically what a natural body means. Natural body is a body that everything can be separated, but the things that it does, in other words, the form of it, the functions of it, are explained by itself, and they're not just two smaller level things that happen to be working together because someone put them together or something like that.
So because a mouth can't be something independently of what it's part of.
Exactly, and by then the same thing. By the way, we could talk about a stone. You don't have to. A person is very complicated, and that's why we talk about a soul. Let's stop. We went very far. Let's start somewhere earlier. A stone is different than a car, okay? And one way it's different is that a stone is one thing, and all of the stone parts in it are just stones. They're simple. That's basically a simple thing, in that sense. They don't do anything different. No part of the stone does anything different than any other part. And whatever being a stone is a thing that's not explained by the little pieces in the stone doing something. It just does what it does, which is the stone nature of it, which is falling and things like that. Okay, or being affected by gravity doesn't change anything. Okay, this is the and masha'inkan, something that is made out of a stone. You're going to need two stones to explain it, at least, which basically means two stones plus a guy or a principle to put it together, or a guy to put it together, or a guy to make it move, and so on.
But so natural things are singular, I guess, in a way that
they're basic.
Things are not.
I don't know what singular means. They're basic.
Meaning it's one thing in a way that
natural things are substances. Natural things are substances. They're basic. They're basic. They're the building blocks of other things. But really, the best way to say this would be they can be explained by themselves. In other words, they're being. In other words, let's go back to our big picture. In other words, they fall into the category of being called substance, which is just another word for this, for a thing, or zia essence, right? For a thing that doesn't need something else to explain what it is,
So
or to be what it is.
Would
right?
the best example of that be the periodic table?
No, absolutely not, because those are dead things. Those are but this is not according to him. These are details. These are details. Periodic table is according to modern science, the basic structure, the basic elements, and some level of. I don't know why this is the most interesting level, but one level of things that everything else is made out of. So yes, those are more natural, but according to him, that's not true, because bigger macro things are also natural.
Well,
and doing this, and they know about theories like this. It's not like, in other words, the periodic table is too low for this.
Like
this is important.
You take carbon. There is nothing
to
break it down to.
But again, we're not worried about being able to break down things. This is the very important point. Everyone knows that you can break down things into more parts and so on, and that's not enough. That's not what makes it more natural. It might. These are details of a different question. In other words, stone is made out of a bunch of elements and so on. And Aristotle also knew that it made out of a bunch of elements and so on, even if it was not as detailed theory as we have. And he still thinks that a stone is a natural thing, because being a stone is doing what stones do. Okay, changing in the ways that stones change, or whatever exactly you say it, moving in the ways that stones move, and you don't actually need to explain it by anything else, or you can't explain it by anything else. If that is not true, and it could be explained by something else, maybe, but that's probably not entirely correct. But then you get into discussions of details of where exactly the line between natural and unnatural would be. The thing with periodic table is that it doesn't explain organization of anything, although it itself has organization. But there's obviously, at least that's the way, the only way this would work, is that there's higher levels of organization that are also natural. That's the basic point. They're also natural in the sense of them being a kind of thing. If this is true or not,
if you cut me in half, it's not like half of me is and the other half of me is. Nothing really is, right?
Exactly, and in the same, and if I would break you down to your hydrogen and carbon and whatever, you're not going to be what you are anymore, right? So it doesn't actually explain what you are at all. It breaks you, it destroys you, right? So the periodic table doesn't actually explain stones; it destroys stones. Yeah.
How do we get to that?
Because stones are made out of but this is really a question that we should take into
The
a
fact that
different
I'm
class.
made out of things.
Just to be clear,
you can't
just to
cut
be
me
clear,
in
this
half,
is
and I'm
this
still
is
made out of the same
the wrong
thing.
question. In
So
other words, we have to try to get
Disturb the
basic
natural
basic
thing.
basic
Right,
concepts
but what
Exactly.
makes you up are these elements.
in a different sense. In a different sense. In a different
Doesn't
sense.
matter. I am still something that's
In a
not
different
just
sense.
elements that's in me.
In a different sense, exactly. You would be destroyed if it would be destroyed.
If you take all the elements that I made out of and you put it in a pot,
it just stops
it's not me.
existing. Beside, no, that's not the problem. But the point is that we have to try to think in very babyish ways, and then we could start applying all these complicated things. We have to try to think of just like how they call
No, but me
halacha.
being a thing is not something you
How
can't
they
take
call
out my
halacha,
mouth and now I'm just
little
me
and
without a
man.
mouth, right?
Yeah, and you.
My mouth is definitely not just a mouth.
I don't know. You can't. I don't know. I'm not sure what you're saying. I didn't understand what you said.
There is
You
no
can't.
mouth.
You can't explain according to the basic way of thinking. You can't explain even racks. And Aristotle knew this. In other words, there were people that tried to do this, and he thinks that it doesn't work for logical reasons, not only for like scientific, factual reasons. You can't explain things by just cutting them up into smaller parts until you find the smallest part, because that doesn't explain what the thingness of them. This is why he thinks that there are substances. You might disagree. Someone would say that these are not substances, but that gets into different questions, and it could be even. Again, can't get too complicated. But at the level of a rack, at the macro level of a rack, you can't actually explain a rack by just saying a rack is just a bunch of little atoms doing things, because they, according to assuming that they don't actually do the same thing that a rack does, which they don't, for all kinds of complicated reasons. I'm not talking about life. No, I didn't I didn't say anything yet about life.
One second, I'm asking, does he hold that what's it called, it's like
That what is life? No,
whatever?
no, I didn't say a word in this class yet about life. All that is discussed.
I'm asking,
What?
is there in this
Natural things don't have to be living things.
to separate, that's it.
No shaykhs, right? The rocks are natural things, as are all the elements, whatever, as they are found purely. I mean, they're also natural things. They also have a nature. Nobody disagrees that they have a nature. The only question is if higher level things could also have a nature. In other words, if they're the only nature, only things that have a nature. But that's why we're getting distracted by asking that question. All natural things are the ones that don't need other things to explain to be what they are. In other words, substances. Okay.
I mean, I don't say this is a rock because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, for the rockness of it, not for the material makeup of it. They do.
Right, yeah.
But the rockness of it isn't anything besides it being a rock.
It is relying on it being rocks and trees.
Exactly. We can't make cameras without rocks and trees. But not only you can't. What it is
It's the rocks and trees that operate, that use the
that
natural,
put together by some
natural
guy
things to-
in a factory in Japan. You can't say camera without that story. You could say rock without that story. And very important, and according to this, they have to remember that this is, for example, this takes away a certain kind of creationism. That's what I'm just saying this to make it clear, right? If you have a God that put together the pieces at some point or at every moment, whatever, then there's no nature, because then everything is artificial. If that's the understanding that you have of rocks. If someone would tell you that God put together by Shash Sabarajis, this is
Not
miskin.
relatively to the
Yes,
camera.
of course.
Of course not.
Yes,
But if
yes.
we call nature, it means that it does its thing
It doesn't-
through God's program at the beginning.
No.
No.
See, no. When if you say that, then you didn't understand anything.
Because then God is
Okay.
a camera maker.
Okay, very
then God
very
is just
important.
another camera
Exactly,
maker.
exactly. Then the things we're talking about, what kind of things the things are, not about what happened to them. It doesn't. That's not really. That's just a way of seeing it. Again, the kind of thing that a camera is a kind of thing that you need something not inherent to it, not inside it, not being what it is that makes it into a camera. Masha
out
Einkan.
of the thing.
I don't. Again,
The creator. The creator out of the thing.
I don't know what. Not
If you believe in creator,
only in a
created,
certain
then-
way. In a certain way, I can understand in days. What I'm trying to say is that if you think that a God, and I don't say God for a reason, put together pieces, just like we put together a camera. If you think that a good analogy for God creating the world is a person creating things out of other things, well, we could ask where those other things came from. But let's skip that level. But even at this level, then you don't have nature. Then the whole idea of natural things existing doesn't make any sense. Because the idea of a natural thing is something that it just is what it is. It doesn't need someone to put it together. You verstehst? So you can't have God putting them together and nature still existing. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. That's why I'm trying to get at that. This thought of natural things is that there's some things that just are what they are because of what they are, and that's their definition, and that's their being or their essence, and all these kind of words that just mean the same thing in the end.
It's just funny because they're really dancing around what the definition of nature is. We can't pin it down.
No, this is
exactly
definition.
this.
I'm not looking for a
Nature
definition.
are the things that just are. You don't need to explain them by things that work inside of them. They work in their own way. They have their own working.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning you don't need to explain a tree.
No, not only you explain it by saying it's a tree. Now a tree might do certain things, but that's because it's a tree.
You could explain what it means to be a tree, but
Second, you say God.
you can explain what it means to be a tree, but you don't need to explain that by any other thing, any other being.
The backstory.
So you're saying if I take a tree, I can explain to you what the tree is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a camera, I have to explain.
Cameras don't do anything, by the way. Not only they do anything because we have to press a button. They don't do anything to be cameras either. Trees just, besides for doing things after they also do being trees. Cameras don't do being cameras. That's not a thing that they do. They become cameras by someone else making them into a camera. In other words, out of things that already existed, that already have their own principle of doing something. So in other words, there's a very important difference between the way in which a camera is a camera and the way in which a rack is a rack.
Because
a rack is really a rack.
Doing tree things,
exactly. And there's nothing in a rack doing something other than rack things. Exactly. Now you could disagree with this factually, maybe you'll say it's not true, but that's at least the thought, the concept, okay? You could just, if you don't disagree with it factually, then you just move down this concept to a level on your story. It doesn't change anything. Okay? It doesn't make any difference. If you think that it's the element table, so those are the natural things. That doesn't make a difference. You have to understand the concept. This concept might be wrong, but you can't really disprove it by finding a fact. The facts will just change where the natural things are. So that's another side note. Okay, and this is the chilek for natural things and unnatural things. Okay, it's very important because if we don't understand that, then nothing ever makes sense in any of these discussions ever.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I'm stupid. Can we repeat this one more time? Just what is the bottom line between natural and unnatural? Just bottom line. I won't argue nothing. Just
natural things do what they are, and unnatural things don't do what they are.
Okay.
There's problems with these things that you give you a lot of slogans, but you have to sort of like do the work to like think. Go be a bit. This is true. If you want to understand these things, well, first you have to forget all the science books because they don't give you good concepts. They give you a lot of information, but very bad concepts. Secondly, or they don't give concepts at all. Then you go to philosophy of science to like start saying, wait, what does this even mean? Secondly, you need to do what Aristotle says in the beginning of metaphysics, which is that wisdom starts with wonder. We discussed this. Oh, I don't know if I did. I can do a whole class about this. Point is, you need to start being very stupid, like you said. And we know so many things. That's a tree. A tree is leaves, but that didn't answer my question. You have to like be a very little baby, and start to try to think of like walk around or whatever. Just do some, like phenomenologists know how to do this kind of work. Sometimes that's the only people that even teach that, or like do some meditation and like try to like tell yourself the difference between a camera and a tree. There's obviously a difference, right? Everyone sort of agrees that there's some kind of difference. Unless you can have a metaphysics where there's no difference. Like I said, you could use God to make no difference, or you could be a total reductionist where there's no difference. There's two ways which have a lot in common where there's no real such difference. But I can't say that class now. But there's a base that it's not crazy to think that there is a difference. And to define the difference, you could give all these formulas and all these like slogans, but you have to sort of like look at it and try to figure it out. Otherwise, okay. The main thing that we're trying to get at here is what he said here. And if we're still on, where am I? I'm gonna stop here.
I think natural things don't require anything to do what it does.
I'm still on page on
Camera
number.
Needs natural things to do what it does and be.
I'm still on number one. Solid substance, and the explanation of this here is.
Because in here there's a tree doing something tree-like, and a rock doing something rock-like, and a piece of metal doing something piece of metal-like, and a piece of glass doing something glass-like to be what it is.
So a camera can't do things that a camera-like.
It doesn't do anything at all.
It does things that a camera-like only because there are trees. Inside of this there are tree things doing what are tree-like, and metal things doing what are metal-like.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just is. A camera requires natural things doing what they are and being what
Camera
they
doesn't
are
have being. Something very real about this. Cameras don't have being. There's things in them that have being. but cameras don't have being. There's someone has to give them that, and even they don't do anything. But it's another thing.
Being is deeply artificial in a serious way. Not
it doesn't have being.
Right,
it's not a substance. It's made out of substances. But it's not a substance. There's no such a thing. In other words, this is another weird way of saying it, but it's not going to help you. So, but if you go to like God and you ask him how many things are there, he's not going to tell you cameras, because there are no cameras. I don't want to say God didn't make cameras or they didn't make the things that's not what I'm trying to say. I say we ask someone that knows all the things that exist. He doesn't know anything about cameras. And this is why some of the people, whatever, I'm not going to get into this. Point is, if
you can't cut off someone.
No, this is why some people will tell you that God doesn't know anything about the specifics. But the point is, because they don't really exist. If there's someone whose job is to know the things that really exist, you could call it a God or God. That's a different discussion. If there's some guy who his job, but this is, by the way, this is not some God, this is our job, because this is what wisdom is. Knowledge is. Knowledge is knowing things that exist. It's not knowing all kinds of things that don't really exist, right? That doesn't seem important. That's why all the people forever that didn't ever hear of cameras were very smart. Because the fact that they didn't know about cameras doesn't make any much of a difference. That's why technology doesn't make you have any wisdom or knowledge of the universe. Because it's just making things out of other things. It's by definition artificial. And that's why it doesn't change much regarding wisdom. It's practical wisdom and so on, different things. Not practical wisdom, what is it called?
To let you do things, not let you know things.
Yeah, there's some level of knowledge in this, but it's not... not only making them. The point is, if there's like a guy, a malach, whose job is to know all the things, he doesn't know cameras, doesn't know anything about cameras. This is why the Mekabbalim don't know anything about things that most of the things that we think we know about, because they only know what the malachim tell them. Now, I'm serious about this. This is why Aristotle doesn't know, doesn't care, but like, that's not his thing. Because it doesn't really exist. The only things that really exist, and really exist are for him, there are things that really exist, right? The like Chabad or whoever is denied that anything really exists, or anyone that has like a God story where everything is just God playing with things. But anyone that thinks that really exists, in other words, not only things exist, but things have natures. In other words, nature exists. In other words, some things do things from themselves, from what they are. You could look at a tree and there's like a tree. It's a zach. It's a hefza, a gavra. We'll soon get to gavra. But it's a hefza at least. It's a natural, it's a real thing. It's not, we'll get to the parts and so on, but it's just a tree because it's a tree. It's lishma. Okay? It's for the sake of itself, at least in some sense. That's a natural thing. Everything else is not by itself. You can't have tables without trees. Not only you can't have tables without trees, you can't be a table without a tree. See, this is the important thing. You can't say a table without a tree, but you can be a table without a tree. Right? You could be a tree without a tree. Without anything.
Car will be another example.
Yeah, a car is definitely, even if it's self-driving, it doesn't change anything. A car is not a thing. A tree is a thing. You could be a tree without. You're just a tree. It's made out of things. It's true that it's made out of things, but those things are not things more than it is. They aren't. If you could break it down and so on, that's not the point.
A car relies on other things being what they are in order to be what it is.
Yeah. Trees also do in some level, but not in the level of treeness. It's important.
Right, meaning as what it is. It
to be a tree, you need to have wood, and you need to have whatever the trees are made out of. You need to have all those things. But doesn't help you be a tree. It helps you be able to be a tree and so on. It helps you. I don't know how to say it exactly. You don't need them to say what a tree is. A tree doesn't need them to be a tree.
Nothing else being what it is.
There's no such thing as.
In it.
I don't know what that means.
No, because a car, you have to have metal being what it is, meaning participating in its metalness.
I don't know what participating is.
No, that's exactly what it is, being what it is.
Okay, so if the side, yeah, trees don't. Well, they do in some way. That's what I'm trying to say. Just not for the tree being a tree. In other words, they're besides for the tree being a tree. Let's say something like this, right? They're besides for the tree being a tree. It's possible that
hold on a second. Metal has to be. Is metal natural?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess metals. Yeah. Okay.
Again, in some sense.
Nothing else has to be what it is for metal to be what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't do much, but whatever it does, it just does by being metal. It doesn't do it by metal being connected with another metal and some guy putting it together and so on. Whatever cars do, they don't do by being cars. There's no such a thing as being a car. They do it by a bunch of things in the car doing things.
They just are. That's it. So they are. It's
yeah. When a rack falls down, it just happens because he's by being a rack. When a tree grows, it's growing by being a tree. That doesn't mean that a tree doesn't need nutrients and so on to grow. and doesn't need whatever trees are made out of. But the growing of the tree, which is what this tree
It doesn't
does,
need to be what it
the
is
tree
for it to be what it is. It might need something to enter into it, or something to come near, or whatever. But it doesn't need something else to be what it is in order for it to be what it is.
yeah, the explanation of a tree is not a bunch of things. Is not through water and whatever it goes into trees, because there's besides for that something,
Right.
and that's not true for cars, or for anything artificial. Cars are just very, very artificial. They're so fake that they're like gag. But even like a simple machine is very artificial. Even an axe is artificial, right? And this is actually Aristotle's example. Axes don't cut. Did you notice? They don't cut. They are cutting things. They have a form of cutting, but they don't cut. Right?
Not the gun that shoots.
And Aristotle says this is literally what it says in the end of this chart. Exactly. No, exactly. This is called kli. This is called orange. Not only don't they cut, he gives this like this counter example. Like if a axe would have to be a living tree, a living thing, then the axe that you have in your box would not be an axe. It would just be something that looks like an axe. In the same way that an eye made out of glass and looking exactly like an eye that doesn't see is not an eye. That's very important. You could take an eye and have it be exactly painted or whatever like an eye, but it doesn't see. Then it's not an eye. It's something that not the same thing as being an eye. Being an eye is something that sees. Okay, and looking like an eye and so on is very similar, but it's just a totally different thing. It's not even like no shakas.
Axe just is that.
No, and which another way of saying it, which an axe, if an axe would have to be a living thing, if we would have wanted, it's like a weird way of saying it, but trying to get at this distinction. If an axe if you would have wanted an axe to have a soul, which is what a living thing form is, then it would have the axe that you have would be fake because it doesn't axe. Now that it's not a living thing, there's no problem. That's also not a natural thing, right? It's not a natural thing because it only cuts because it's made out of metal, which can be
complicated way of putting it.
Yeah, it's backwards. But the point is that axes don't cut, which is why they're not alive. Although they cut, right? But they don't cut because of what they are. They cut because of
trees are metal being what metal is.
Well, they don't cut because of what they are. They cut because someone uses them and someone made them out of metal, which can be formed into something sharp and so on.
Yeah,
axe is what it is because the metal is what it is and the wood is what it is.
Exactly.
I don't want to go further.
And there's more problems. There's more things. There's more differences.
It's tough. I also have to.
There's more things with that, but we have to get. So wait. So that's why we're still up to number 2. We'll get to the number 2. Okay. We just need to understand the difference between a natural body and a not natural body. Okay. Natural bodies are things that do things by being what they are, and unnatural bodies are things that need other things to be what they are, in order to do what they do. Okay. Very simple.
Yeah, I think that's the best way of putting it.
Which is another way of saying God made them, but that's not what the point is, you understand? Wow. If you believe that God is nature, or God is the main cause of nature, whatever. If natural things are another way of God made things, which is what many people believe.
Is that, what's his name, Spinoza?
Yeah, he got it from here. No, I'm just saying, because that's not getting into the discussion of Spinoza and so on. It's not the point. No, but if you agree, that's the reference. But if you agree that a definition for natural things are what God made, then this is what it means. This is what God doing something is. Like the Rambam says, "Valichas ma'aseh lehem" means they were natural, right? Very opposite pshat of simple pshat, but that's what it must mean. Yeah. Okay. The pasuk in Shemos, I don't know. This is what it means. Okay, but not teaching that thing now. But the point is, if there's a difference, if there's a sense in which cameras were not made by God, but trees were made by God. Of course, in other words, cameras were made by things which were made by God, right? In other words, which have natures. That's just a definition. Of course, you could have a God that's
described as the first maker.
No. If God is a maker, then everything is artificial.
No, not Aristotle's. The other thing I'm saying.
No, different. No, this is Aristotle's God. The God of nature. The Elohim, Gematria Teva. That one. He is the one that made trees and not cameras. Cameras are made by people using things that God made. Which is some second level nature. I'm not saying it's not made by God, but it's just it's said in a different way.
But God making something allows things.
Well, in other words,
things being what they are.
In other words, no. In other words, that's why you have to say that doesn't have being. In other words, cameras don't exist. They don't really exist.
Why? Because
they're not substances.
Things need to be what they are.
Exactly. So they don't really exist.
That's what
just definition of existence as something that could stand for itself. It's just a weird definition of existence. Doesn't mean that doesn't exist, right? But it means that wisdom or knowledge has to do with knowing those kind of things. But that's another whole thing. That's why we could say that God didn't make it, because God doesn't make things that don't exist. That doesn't make sense. right? Okay, Sean, that's enough for this. We're gonna move on for here. You could cut off the page here, and next week we're up to here. The organic body, because I started talking about it, but we didn't get to it.
Okay. Cars are natural.
Cars are not natural.
Okay, but just to go through the questions
That's
to
enough
make
for
sure
now.
I know what they're saying, and to